Welcome. Welcome, everyone, in person and online streaming. I'm thankful that you are here. My name is Ty Sidgley. I'm the David H. and Ann L. Hinchcliffe Professor of History and the Executive Director of the Common Ground Program for Active Citizenship. I want to welcome our guests, Jon Baselice, Emily Mendrala, and our moderator, Mimi Gurgis. Thank you for being here. Common Ground's mission is to promote civil discourse and active citizenship on tough issues. And it's been a tough summer. So tonight, I just want to give a couple of remarks because I don't think I can go on without doing it, is that we're all thinking about the victims of political violence. It's been a long list of what happened just this summer. Minnesota Democratic Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband fatally shot. An arsonist set fire to the Pennsylvania governor's residence with Democrat Governor Josh Shapiro and his family inside. An immigration and customs enforcement officer was shot and injured at a detention facility in Texas. The New Mexico Republican Party headquarters was set on fire. A shooter attacked the Center for Disease Control and Prevention headquarters, killing a police officer. Campus shootings at Annunciation Catholic and Evergreen High School, and the shocking televised assassination of Charlie Kirk while debating college students at Utah Valley University. Does this summer's violence mean that Americans can't discuss differences, can't engage in challenging issues? Does violence win? Well, I know about violence. I spent my adult life in uniform as an Army officer. The military is, after all, about the deterrence of violence, and if that fails, the management of state-sponsored violence for political ends. Now, as a historian, I study violence, and unfortunately, America has been through many periods of political violence. I write about the White Terror campaign in the South in the early decades of the 20th century that led to the gruesome death of thousands. I'm writing a book now about political violence in the late 1960s and early 70s when universities suffered from thousands of bombings in campuses. Political assassinations happened regularly and cities burned from riots. However, just because we have had violence in the past doesn't mean we must suffer that fate now. We can choose. Historians know we have a perfect track record of predicting the future. We're always wrong. But I will hazard a prediction anyway. I know that this community can talk about difficult issues. Yet I know it's hard. Education should make us uncomfortable, yet being uncomfortable should not cause us harm. And that's a tough line to find. I don't find the balance all the time. And even though I try, in class, in the media, in my scholarship, and with Common Ground. With social media, civil discourse is even harder. I had to take my phone number off the college website because crazies keep calling me and threatening me. Yet open discussion is, I believe, the best way forward and at the heart of both the liberal arts college experience and the best tradition of our nation and our community. We have a choice on how to respond, and I know how I want to respond. I want to state my views freely and fully without fear, listen with compassion to those with whom I disagree. I want to treat people who disagree with me with honesty, dignity, and respect. And I want to look for common ground where it exists and understand that common ground might not exist, and that's okay too. And we will model that behavior tonight. And we will create more opportunities for our community to have respectful, honest conversations. So let me plug a couple of those upcoming. Tomorrow, 16 September, at noon, we'll have a post-event lunch discussion in the Levitt Center at KJ. On the 22nd, we will have a Common Ground continued, featuring our economics professor, Paul Hagstrom, who is here in the front row, moderated by fellow econ professor Steve Wu. Thank you both for participating in that on Monday. Well, we have this program because of President Stephen Tepper, our faculty, alumni, and friends. And the college is especially grateful for Mary Helen and Rob Morris, David and Lori Hess, Eve Niquette and Charles Poole, and the Hinchcliffe family. Their support is indispensable. Thanks as well to our Common Ground ambassadors. Please raise your hands, ambassadors. Thank you very much for being here. Yay, ambassadors. And the Common Ground team, Katie, Stewart, and Kim Ritchie. We find our speakers from our strong alumni network. And my thanks to trustee Stu Ingus, the CEO of Venable, a DC-based law firm who helped us find today's speakers. So let me introduce our moderator, and she will introduce our speakers. Mimi Gurgis is a guest host of C-SPAN flagship live morning calling show, Washington Journal. She has extensive hosting, interviewing, and producing experience in broadcast TV, cable, and radio. She has produced and hosted her own show, The Mimi Gerges Show, on PBS-affiliated stations and on SiriusXM. She's also the best moderator in the business, and we are so happy to have her back on the Hill. Thank you, Mimi, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ty, and welcome everyone. I'm really happy to be back with you again at Hamilton. We're talking about immigration policy. We'll also talk about detentions and deportations. I will start by introducing our panelists, then we'll jump right into our Q&A. We'll go for about 50 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to you for Q&A. So as we're talking, be thinking about the questions that you want to ask. Emily Mendrala is served as Deputy Assistant to the President, Senior Advisor on Migration and Coordinator for the Southwest Border between 2023 and 24. Before that, she was at the State Department as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, where she focused on Cuba, Central America, and regional migration. Emily's worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the National Security Council. Welcome, Emily. Jon Baselice is an immigration and policy law fellow at Cornell, former vice president of immigration policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where he led the organization's efforts to modernize America's legal immigration system and expand workforce access. A former legislative counsel to Senator Marco Rubio, his expertise is in employment-based visa programs, regulatory reform, and bipartisan policy strategy. And welcome to you, Jonathan. Emily, let's start by putting this topic of immigration policy in historical perspective. Briefly tell us, how did we get to this point?
That's a big question. First, thank you so much for having us, Hamilton College. And this is such an incredible space for civil discourse, to bring people together to debate and to share ideas. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight. How did we get here? I think first, we are a nation of immigrants. It's no secret that immigrants have shaped this country, have given immeasurably to this country, to its communities as well. We're also a nation of laws. And unfortunately, our legal structure on issues around immigration has been stuck, and has been stuck for decades. And so we've seen since the 90s immigration policy being carried out largely by executive policy, by tinkering around the edges in a way that is incredibly vulnerable, flimsy for one side to come in and wipe the ledger from what the previous person did, erect their own policy that is then susceptible to being wiped by their successor. So the immigration laws that we are operating under now were put in place in the 1990s when individuals coming to the US-Mexico border were largely Mexican nationals, largely single males coming to work. That is so far removed from the context that we saw at our southern border during the Biden administration, where there was a proliferation of families, nationalities from across the Western Hemisphere, not to mention people coming from all over the world to arrive at our southern border to seek asylum, to claim protection. And our structure, our systems, were woefully inadequate, woefully under-resourced, such that individuals who came to the United States to seek asylum were put in a years-long, sometimes 7-year-long backlog before their case could be adjudicated. And that's the very short version of where we have gotten in the United States. When you zoom out, you realize that migration is a global phenomenon. It is occurring not just with flows from the south to the north arriving at the US-Mexico border, but people are moving all around the world for very different reasons, in very different ways, sometimes bringing their families, sometimes not. And the global architecture that is governing global protection. These are the U.S. refugee, the refugee admissions program, for example, was put in place in the 60s. This is a post-World War II architecture that was fit for purpose at a moment in time, and we are so far removed from that moment now. And so in the United States, we're operating under outdated laws and legal structures, and so too on the global stage.
So I was going to say, I was going to bring Jonathan in at this point because Emily used the word stuck. Mm-hmm. Are we stuck, or is the immigration system broken in this country?
First, Hamilton College, thank you for inviting me to participate tonight. To determine whether or not we are stuck or is the immigration system broken, I think we're quibbling over rhetoric when we're not really pointing at why is it that our immigration laws are stuck in the past. Like, we look at the last time the legal immigration system was reformed, it was 1990. And I'm not trying to age myself, but I was the ripe old age of 6 when that happened. And that's your basic structure that most companies are having to use when they're trying to find workers to fill their job openings. This is designed pre-internet being a thing. To me, there's a bigger problem here. Immigration to me is a symptom of it, or our lack of progress in immigration is a symptom of it. But in recent years, when it comes to immigration or other really controversial issues, our friends in Congress are just going to say, oh, well, I'm going to suit up for the president because he is wearing the same jersey that I'm wearing. And that's something that it transcends parties. It's an issue of, well, if they're going to do this, I'm just going to go along with it. I tend to think, now, granted, I started working this issue 15 years ago. I thought this tit for tat, this, let's try to constantly play this game of like who can one up the other side in terms of really trying to own their political opponents. Like, I think this started with the DACA policy back in 2012. Because I remember, clear as day, working with Senators Kyle, Kay Bailey Hutchison, my old boss, Senator Rubio, who's now Secretary of State, and we were talking with Senator Dick Durbin. I mean, part of Democratic leadership for a very long time. And once the DACA decision was made,
This is deferred action on
deferred action for child arrivals back in 2012, which really ruined my 28th birthday. Not gonna lie. But the issue here is at that point, like, we're just poisoning the well. And now there's just a complete lack of trust, and everyone's like, all right, you did this? All right, wait till we're in power. You can see what we do.
So then, John, what does a functional, successful immigration system look like to you?
Looks like a lot of things. I think the biggest characteristic that I would say as a successful immigration system, and this to me is like your goal. This is your North Star, knowing you're not going to hit it. You have a system where no one is coming here illegally. I understand this is very, I don't say it's pie in the sky, but it's the type of thing where, like, you're never going to be perfect. It's like trying to eliminate all crime in New York City. You know it's not going to happen, but you know if you really try hard at it, you'll hit excellence along the way. And that's what you want. Are you making your problems manageable? And to me, the root cause of all the problems, whether it's dealing with a significant amount of arrivals at our southern border during the Biden administration, or it's people claiming that the asylum system is being abused, or individuals coming here, overstaying their visa, finding a job when they don't have a work visa. All of this boils down to you don't have a system that actually allows, whether it's you're trying to promote family reunification, you're trying to ensure that American businesses have the workforce needs being met. These are all issues. It's a matter of capacity and flexibility in managing your immigrant and non-immigrant visa backlogs.
All right, well, Emily worked in the Biden administration. Tell us what was happening behind the scenes when that huge influx of people came across the border during that administration.
There were a couple of huge influxes, points in time when our border when there were so many people arriving at our border that our system could no longer keep up with the number of individuals coming. And when I talk about the system, I'm talking about customs and border protection individuals receiving and apprehending individuals, taking them into custody, the facilities that they had, asylum officers who are supposed to do an initial screening with individuals who claim asylum to see if they have a credible fear of persecution from the country to which they would be returned. And if so, they can then be placed in a backlog for the final adjudication of their asylum claims. I'm talking about detention facilities. I'm talking about immigration judges. I'm talking about the system in its entirety did not have the resources and did not have the manpower to receive the number of individuals that we were receiving at the border. And the reason why is multifaceted. You remember in 2021, we were on the tail end of COVID. Our economy was growing. Economies in Latin America were not. So there was a big pull factor into the United States for economic opportunity. It was also, as I said, the tail end of COVID, travel restrictions were lifting. There was pent-up demand, people who were suffering and would have moved but for travel restrictions and criminal penalties in some countries for traveling and being outside your home during the pandemic. It was also easier to travel than it had been in a while. Flights were cheaper or more attainable. There was smuggling networks popped up and were using social media to great effect. And I think this created somewhat of a perfect storm where we had anticipated in transition planning for the Biden administration that we would see a large number of Central Americans, for example. It was a context that had presented itself several times on the US-Mexico border. We had planned for that and anticipated policies around that. What we didn't expect was several hundred individuals from Mauritania per day arriving at certain points during the Biden administration. We didn't expect Haitian nationals who had traveled to Brazil and Chile, resided there for 10 plus years, to then decide that they needed to move again in search of economic opportunity, travel throughout Latin America, across the Darien Gap, which is this huge, impenetrable, previously, jungle that separates Panama and Colombia that is incredibly dangerous. Travel across this jungle to arrive at the US-Mexico border. It was a whole new set of contexts that we that we had to respond to in the moment.
But Emily, the Biden administration decided to parole those people into the country. So as you say, the system couldn't hold. There was no way to process all those people. They were allowed into the country. Now the border is essentially closed. So why couldn't the Biden administration close the border as the Trump administration has done?
So not everyone was paroled. This is an incredibly complex issue, and I learned a lot during my 4 years in the Biden administration. Individuals who came to the border and claimed asylum, if there were enough asylum officers for them to get that initial screening, they received that. And if they had a credible fear, they were then put into an asylum backlog. If they received the screening and did not, they were returned to their country of origin. 4 countries to where we could return individuals. Many countries around the world do not accept returns of their nationals, and so we had, at the time, no options to return individuals to those countries. They were placed into the United States to wait in the asylum backlog for their cases to be heard. Eventually, the Biden administration recognized that we had a large number of individuals coming from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and were able to work with Mexico to announce a program that, on the one hand, stood up a parole process for individuals to come in an orderly fashion, to receive a screening before they arrived in the United States, to be sponsored by individuals in the United States, oftentimes family members, and on the other hand, an enforcement mechanism to send individuals who did not avail themselves of that pathway. Those individuals were returned back to Mexico. That program, when it was announced, saw arrivals from those 4 countries drop precipitously. I'm talking 97% in the first week. So it was a border management tool that created an orderly, lawful pathway and had an enforcement component. And if I had to kind of sum up the approach to the Biden administration to regional migration from Latin America and the Caribbean, it would be those 2 primary components. An orderly, lawful pathway that recognizes that people are on the move. In fact, we have needs in this country, labor needs. It would be wonderful if we could make those 2 meet, and because of our statutes, and they're so antiquated, they oftentimes don't. But if we have a lawful way to come into the country and then humane border management on our southern border, that is a good recipe for success.
So let's talk about the impact of undocumented workers on the economy. Did you want to say something to that?
He wants to disagree.
I did, because
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
far too often, she and I have been agreeing, so now I can finally have a source of conflict between the 2 of us. But I think one thing, and Emily alluded to this when she says multifaceted. The key problem that you saw during the Biden term, particularly early on, is once you had this influx of people coming early on in 2021, the word was out abroad, there are no negative consequences for showing up on the border. The government's been overwhelmed. There's no desire to say, hey, we're going to control the border and you're not allowed in. We're going to try to return you very quickly. That was not done. Now, to me, as you got into the middle of the Biden term, and we talk about the CHNB program, and I remember when this was announced, because we had several roundtables at my old job talking about this. And there was very little outreach to us, not blaming you personally, but we did not hear this in the business community, like, we're going to do this. And the one thing that we had hoped for after the 2022 midterms was, is there going to be an effort to pivot away from going it alone, because we saw what President Biden and the congressional Democrats did with their idea of what comprehensive immigration reform could look like. Basically legalizing a lot of people, letting a lot of folks come here and stay here, even if their status wasn't proper upon their entry or after they overstayed their visa. But there was not much to deal with the legal framework. We weren't talking about employment-based green cards. We weren't talking about family-based green cards, really. There was nothing to do with H-1Bs, nothing on H-2s. These are the types of things that it's harder to do this. It requires presidential leadership, and not just anything. It's the type of leadership that says, hey, I'm going to keep my side at bay, and when they need to be, snapped in a line, I'm the president, I will do that. And for my political opponents in the other party, I have to give them something. We have to meet halfway. And I'm not saying this to blame Democrats, because President Trump in his first term had an opportunity to do this. We had the Jared Kushner effort that unfortunately went nowhere. We had several efforts on the Hill, particularly around the shutdown that happened at the end of 2018 into 2019. There was an opportunity, and we, it fell apart.
You think they learned from the first term and took a much harder line approach in the second term?
Do I think they've taken a harder line approach? I don't think that is an accurate representation of what they have done. I think in some respects they have. In others, they have chosen to pick their battles more wisely. Because what they don't want to do is, they know they have a coalition that is made up of varying views on this issue. You have your hardliners. You also have Maria Salazar. You have Carlos Jimenez. You have Juan Ciscomani. You have Mike Lawler. You have David Valadao. You look at how the Republicans actually won control, like maintain control of the House. Your majority makers are in New York, California. You lose those, you lose your South Florida representatives too. It's Hakeem Jeffries as speaker, and they don't want that. So they're, on certain issues, like, we saw the one big beautiful bill, there's immigration fees. There could have been a lot of other things in there that would have been unwelcome developments for a lot of those members. But you saw them work the bill.
All right, so let's talk about the economy, because I want to talk about the impact of illegal immigration on the economy. On the one hand, you have the argument that undocumented workers are driving down wages, that they're taking low-wage jobs away from documented workers and American citizens, using up social resources. The other side is that they're helping the economy, that they are taking jobs that Americans don't want, that a better economy benefits everybody. Where do you come down on that?
To me, where I come down on this is there are an awful lot of individuals for whom there should be a legal means for them to come here. Whether or not this is through a temporary stay for a job that only lasts a couple years in duration, or these are individuals who are coming here to reside permanently and be employed in a permanent capacity. Those are types of things that need to be hashed out in a real legislative negotiation. And a lot of it's not so much like, I want this and I don't want that. It's a matter of, what can the political calculus bear? What can a House Republican majority that's roughly the size of a handful and a 53-47 majority in the Senate, what can that get? What can you accomplish with that?
So even if we put that aside, what would you want to see happen?
I would like to see the capacity in the immigration system, particularly with regard to the employment-based immigrant visa categories and in the non-immigrant visa categories for work visas. I would like to see those numbers go up. Can I give you an exact number at this moment in time? No. But to me, clearly the numbers that were set in 1990 aren't working for us. And when you have a situation like this that has been perpetuated for decades, the lack of visa capacity is literally creating a market for a lot of nefarious people outside the country to abuse a lot of folks who are trying to come here and look for a better life. Even if these folks are coming here knowing that I don't have a visa and I probably have a very specious asylum claim, they're coming here for a reason. The incentive structure in their life is such that whatever could possibly happen to me in the United States, it can't be worse than what I'm dealing with in my home country or the country in which I'm currently residing that's not that far from where my country of birth is. We have to find ways to allow those individuals to come here. Not all of them, but a significant amount of them have to be allowed to, it's in our interest to have them come here, particularly if we know who they are. We can check out their background. We can make sure they're not a threat to national security or public safety. And we actually know who they're going to be employed by. If something bad happens to them while they're working, we know who we can hold accountable for those types of unfortunate circumstances. If people are coming here without status and they don't have any form of documentation and they're employed on the table, it's like you look at, because I get this from a lot of folks both on the left and the right. You're talking about people are driving down wages and they're not being treated well by their employers. Well, if they're coming here legally and we know who they are, we know where they're employed, and we know what they're supposed to be doing in their job, as compared to those who are here not legally,
okay, so
who is more susceptible for being exploited?
But let me ask Emily, what are we
people
supposed to do?
People who are here legally or people who are here illegally?
Right, so what are we supposed to do? Because it seems that it's the workers that are bearing the brunt of this. They're being picked up, and employers are not paying any kind of penalty for employing them in the first place.
It's a good question. I think the employers are paying a penalty, not necessarily in the legal sense, but they're seeing an economic impact to loss of their workforce. I think especially in certain sectors. What you've seen under the first 8 months of the Trump administration is not just an increase in interior enforcement and a greater presence of ICE and sometimes other federal enforcement officials, but you've also seen a policy to revoke status from individuals who have had status, sometimes for decades. I talked about the parole process that we stood up under the Biden administration for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. That was a 2-year program. And the hope was that individuals, once they came here on a 2-year program, would either be able to find an onward destination in a different country where they could feel safe, or that they could adjust to a more durable status in the United States. One of those durable statuses is something called temporary protected status. It's available to certain countries where the United States deems that it's not safe to return individuals to their country of origin. Sometimes it's granted in the wake of a natural disaster, a hurricane, or sometimes it's granted in the wake of political violence. And so for some people, Hondurans specifically, they had had temporary protected status for decades, since the 90s, and it had been renewed every 18 months on a regular basis since its initial designation. The Trump administration has done away with that. So individuals who have lived here for decades, have had families here, American citizen children and whatnot, and are part of a community, saw their status change from one day to the next. TPS, temporary protected status, was not renewed. Some of these individuals were contributing to companies, to entire sectors, and so the employers, and I understand your question, Mimi, was more about whether or not they should be facing legal consequences, but I will say that the employers have seen in some sectors, such as agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and hospitality, have seen their workforce disappear overnight. So there's an economic consequence. As to whether there should be a legal consequence as well, I think it's a great discussion and one worth having, to make sure that the penalty is not borne by the individuals themselves that are here. Many times had status, saw it revoked overnight, are now getting swept up in interior enforcement raids. Should some of those consequences be borne by the employers as well? I would think yes.
Can I
Do you agree with that?
one point to that?
Should they face legal jeopardy for, they're driving demand by hiring undocumented workers.
Mimi, your question is based on an assumption that the employers actually know the people that they're employing are here without status.
Shouldn't they check?
They do, but the issue is that you have the I-9 construct, the I-9 employment verification construct, which was launched in 1986. I was 2 when this happened. It is still paper-based. And what you have seen happen over the roughly 4 decades where this system has been in place, the federal government, what they've tried to do is basically subcontract this out to the business community to do their job, to make sure that people aren't here illegally. And on the one hand, they say you have to verify their documentation to show you have their identification and you know whether or not their work authorized in the United States. At the same time, if you have any thoughts as to whether or not this individual may be here illegally or might be lying to you, unless you know that with 100% certainty and you ask for another document and you're told, no, this is who I am, you could be on the wrong end of an unfair immigration-related employment practice lawsuit, and you can lose your business. I'm not saying that employers should be let off scot-free, and I'm probably one of the people you're going to find who is the most sympathetic to the business community, having represented the business community for the past 10-plus years on this issue. But there are so many other technological tools we could be using besides a piece of paper and a bunch of signatures and looking at a document. Like, you've got chip and pin technology in credit cards. You can't use this in employment documentation too. You've got you've got the pin readers now. Instead of having to stick your credit card into the machine to make a payment, now you just put it there, it goes beep, and then all of a sudden, wow, you get the little notice from Capital One saying, you've spent $34.99 on XYZ. you're trying to tell me we couldn't use this in the employment verification context. I think we can. And I think that needs to be part of the broader conversation. Getting back to your other question, what would you like to see? I would love to see something like this. Because you're taking all the gray area out of it, and you can literally make a bright line. Did the company do this? Did they not do this? If yes, they're okay. If no, they're on the hook for whatever malfeasance they committed. But right now, you've got employers between a rock and a hard place, and the federal government's just like, well, we can't really update this because it's hard. So there's a lot of facets here where, you can't just sit here and be like, oh, it's the employer's fault.
I want to turn to what the administration has been calling enhanced vetting at the borders, at ports of entry. This targets legal immigrants and those with student visas, international student visas, who officials think that they might have expressed views that threaten national security or undermine foreign policy. What's your reaction to that?
I'll say that during the Biden administration, we came a long way on vetting. And this is an area that involves lots of different departments and agencies in the US government. There are lots of databases. There are lots of cross-checking when an individual enters into the immigration system. We have lots of tools that we can bring to bear to determine if an individual poses a risk to national security, to public safety, and others. Never once did I see our vetting take into account loyalty pledges or infringing on freedom of speech in a way that didn't also tick the national security and public safety boxes. And something that's been really concerning to me is stories that I've heard anecdotally of individuals who have been denied entry or had their status revoked or visa revoked because they said something negative about the Trump administration. I think that is a bridge too far. We are a nation that prizes freedom of speech. We, as evidenced in this room today, we value civil discourse. We value differences of opinions. We should have a thick enough skin to tolerate criticism as well. I think there is a very real place for vetting when it comes to national security threats and public safety, absolutely. And it's up to the US government to preserve safety of American citizens in that process insofar as we can through vetting and other tools that we have. But when it infringes on freedom of speech and when it comes down to simple dissent, I think that's gone far too far.
Do you agree with that, Jonathan? Because your former boss, Secretary Rubio, does not. He has said if you are on social media complaining about the United States and undermining our foreign policy with your views, we're not giving you a visa.
I think this is where my old boss is in a position where he is looking at the situation. And I say, look, I have my causes for concern with going down this path a little bit, but at the same time, when you look at all the campus protests that have happened recently and what some of these students are accused of doing and how they've treated their fellow classmates based upon their different religious beliefs or things like that, I have very little sympathy for those people. So if they get caught up in the system because they wanted to bully their fellow classmates in a way that I think, if you look at the national security or the public safety boxes that you tick under the inadmissibility or removability criteria, I think this is a rational way to look at it. Now, you can disagree with that view, but if they think this is okay, and you have a bunch of students that want to try to bully other students in this way, I just...
What do you think, Emily?
I don't see campus protests as a form of bullying, so it's hard to have this discussion without knowing exactly what it is that you're talking about.
There's a difference between campus protests and barring people from either going in a building or getting people stuck inside a building on Columbia University's campus. That type of stuff, that's not the type of behavior we should be encouraging here in the United States, in my humble opinion. So you're a foreign national, you're engaging in that type of behavior, I have no sympathy for you.
I think universities should be a safe place for protest, for civic engagement, for students speaking their minds and engaging in activities that make their voices heard, be they American citizens or foreign students.
Let's talk about detentions and deportations. Emily, the current administration has set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 immigration arrests a day. Tom Homan, he's the White House border czar, said last week that the number of detention beds is almost at capacity. I want to ask you, is there a minimum standard for treatment according to the law, and who sets that in these detention facilities?
To answer your exact question, yes. I know as it relates to children, there is a court settlement, and a judge oversees the implementation of that court settlement and has set out very strict criteria for how children are treated while they're in detention. And John, you may know the exact stipulations of who governs the treatment in ICE custody, or what provision of the INA. I suspect you have an encyclopedic knowledge of that.
I actually don't. But in terms of what happens in ICE detention, you also have, in the past, you used to have private prison companies also bid for contracts for these types of things. But getting to the root question of whether or not we should be detaining this many people, I think we got to ask ourselves how many folks are here without status, and how many of these folks are individuals who are subject to removal. Because for years, there has never been enough capacity to hold these individuals. Emily was talking about this earlier in terms of the rushes to the border during the Biden administration. If you had had more beds, if you had had more bed space, I mean, they try to do this with they call them the soft side structures. They're basically tents. Tents in the middle of the desert. I mean, that's not, it's not good living, I'll tell you that right now. And to me, this is something, and I'll give Emily credit where credit's due, because she tried to work with Senator Sinema and Senator Lankford and their teams in 2023 and 2024 to try to find some sort of compromise on this, which would have increased bed space. I still think it wasn't nearly enough, because when you have, I think it was roughly 50,000-ish was the amount of bed space that ICE had at the time. I know it went up in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But you had 300,000 people coming to the border in 1 month. You're not covering that with 50,000 beds. You're just not. So guess what? You need a lot more bed space. You need a lot more detention space. There's an awful lot of old military bases that have, they're just sitting around gathering mothballs. It's a place to put people. There's an actual structure. We need to fix some roofs or here or there. But that, if you're going to be serious about having an enforcement regime that says, listen, if you're to come here illegally and you're subject to removal, we can't just put you in an asylum system where you're going to sit in the country for 5, 6, 7 years, and then we're going to hope you're going to show up in court. That ain't going to work.
So go ahead.
Sorry, I ceded the mic, and I want to grab it back. During the Biden administration, we had a large number of individuals arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border. Our goal was to be able to quickly screen them for those who had a legal basis to be here to continue their asylum claims, quickly process them out, and for those who didn't, to return them quickly to their country of origin without having them wait in the interior of the United States, set down roots to ultimately get a decision 7 years later. That's not humane. And in order to give these quick decisions, we needed more infrastructure at the border. We needed more detention facilities. We needed more asylum officers. We needed several different aspects of the system to be able to quickly screen individuals within days of them arriving in the United States. We viewed that as the most humane approach to people coming here seeking asylum. The difference in what we're seeing between that context and today is that there are very few arrivals at the border, and we could talk about why, but today there are very few arrivals at the border, and so to the extent ICE has daily quotas, those quotas are coming from interior enforcement. They are coming from enforcement operations against people that are residing in the United States. Sometimes they've been here for years, for decades. They have families. And it's interior enforcement that's done in an indiscriminate way. And again, in the Biden administration, our interior enforcement was governed by two primary policies. One was enforcement priorities. We said we have limited resources. ICE isn't going to go after everybody here without status, but we're going to prioritize with our limited resources people who pose a national security threat, a public safety risk, and so on. We also had another policy called the sensitive locations policy that said we don't want to create a culture of fear, a climate of fear, where people are afraid to send their kids to school, afraid to go to their doctor's appointments, afraid to worship. And so we're going to tell you that we, absent, again, really compelling circumstances, national security, public safety, we're not going to conduct enforcement operations at churches, at hospitals, at schools, at libraries. And those two policies helped dissipate the climate of fear that we're seeing in today's context, where interior enforcement has really ramped up, and these quotas are not being applied to individuals who have just crossed the border and are trying to decide, and we're trying to decide if they have a valid or an invalid asylum claim, but rather to people who have resided here and are part of a community's fabric.
If I can add one.
Please.
The reason why you had so many problems during the Biden administration with a significant amount of people coming to the US, knowing they didn't have a visa, knowing that I'm going to sit here and try to play this asylum game, it's because there were no negative consequences for what they were doing. I understand, and I can agree with you on some things. Like, there are individuals who may have lost status at some point who have been in the country for decades. Those are individuals who should not be transported from their hometown, wherever it may be, to an ICE detention facility in Louisiana. That I can agree with. However, if there's no significant negative consequences for suboptimal behavior, you get these problems where you have more and more people coming here illegally. We shouldn't want that. What we should want is to have a legal system that says, hey, if you want to come here in the first place, here are several visa categories that you can apply for. There are many different things that you could do if you want to come here legally. That's what we should be looking to do.
Totally agree, and to the extent that there are consequences imposed, it would be far better to impose them on people days after they arrive in the United States versus years.
Totally agree. There's no argument from me on that. It's just in terms of why we had these issues. I hate to say that, but part of that fear, part of that, there are now consequences for you not abiding by the rules. We can talk, I agree with you, we should change the rules. But if you don't abide by the rules and you're subject to removal, those are the risks you're going to take if you're going to be here without status.
Let's talk about removal.
Go ahead.
Because Emily did mention earlier that there are some countries that will not take their nationals back. Mm-hmm. So we can't deport back to those countries. The solution from the Trump administration has been third country deportations. This includes Uganda, El Salvador, South Sudan. What happens to people when they go there? First, do you agree with that policy as a good solution for what do I do with the people that I can't deport back to their home countries?
I'm not exactly the biggest fan of sending people to countries where they have no idea what's going on. I think that, like, going to a country they've never been to, don't speak the language, don't know the customs, that's not something that we should be trying to promote. At the same time, there are levers that you try to use when you're in government. Like, listen, you got a bunch of nationals, we'll send them to South Sudan. If you want to take them, we'll send them home to you. And, not being in the room where these decisions are being made, that type of context is really helpful to understand whether or not, if I were in their situation, if I were in that particular job, what would I do? It's really tough to say that I would do this or that if you don't know all the facts and circumstances. Now, to me, I think what would help this, and we talked about this earlier in terms of just having more ICE detention facilities, you'd be able to hold them for longer. We don't have that because we only have 50 some odd thousand beds. To me, the other thing that you run into, there's this Supreme Court case known as the Zadvitas case. And this is the one that says you can't hold people indefinitely. I agree with this. However, I think there's a difference between indefinite, just in perpetuity, forever and ever and ever, and can we hold someone a little bit longer in ICE detention so we can figure out what it is that we're going to do with this individual, with this family, with this group of, folks who all came together searching for work or whatever the case may be. And it's usually not that innocent. There's a bunch of folks, well, I say it's usually. There are many cases that are not that innocent. There's an awful lot of folks who are here trafficking fentanyl. They are trafficking humans. They are doing all sorts of bad things. We should have no quarter for those individuals. And if that means we hold on to them a little bit longer than we otherwise would, I'm okay with that. I don't think that violates anybody's rights or their expectations for due process
Emily,
as a non-citizen in the United States.
What is the solution for wanting to deport somebody and their country won't take them back?
It's a tough one. It's a real, especially as we saw the wide range of nationalities arriving at our southern border from countries all over the world. I think we have real strong cooperation with many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And if individuals arrive, don't have a legal basis to be here, we have regular flights, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, of removals to certain countries in the Western Hemisphere. We have systems that talk to one another, and we can upload identity documents that sync and are verified on the other end. And they're systems that have been long in the making over the course of decades in enforcement operations. And we don't have that with countries around the world. And so a lot of the work that we did was diplomacy, to educate countries about our immigration system, about the needs that we have in our removal operations, about the data sharing needs that we have to verify identity documents, sometimes to acquire identity documents if an individual had lost their identity documents along the way. Another solution is, or another tool that we have brokered with Canada, for example, is a safe third country agreement. If an individual, Canada and the United States have entered into an agreement whereby if an individual arrives first in the United States and then travels to Canada and claims asylum, Canada will send them back to the United States to claim asylum in the United States because we are a safe country with a functioning asylum system. And vice versa. If an individual arrives first in Canada and then travels to the United States and claims asylum, we will send them back to Canada because Canada is a safe country with a functioning asylum system. And it is, in some respects, a deterrent, but it also acknowledges that, or it's also, I think, tells us as policymakers that we can be working with countries around the world to strengthen their asylum systems, especially in the Western Hemisphere, when people are moving all the time in the Western Hemisphere, oftentimes not making it to the United States. Venezuelans are residing in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, and to the extent that we can strengthen systems in those countries, systems for protection, but also for integration, so people can be received well into a community can be funded to support them, and so they can be settled and don't feel the need to displace again. These are individuals that aren't going to then make their way to the US-Mexico border and take a perilous journey to get there.
We will start to take your questions shortly. I'm going to ask one more question, but if you start thinking about it, you can raise your hand and somebody with a mic will come to you. Jonathan, President Trump signed an executive order ending birthright citizenship. So parents in the country illegally, they give birth to a child. That child has all the rights of an American citizen. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with the executive order?
To end birthright citizenship.
I think this is something that has to require a constitutional amendment if you want to change this. I also think you look at many other developed countries and how they divvy up citizenship. I think the concept of jus soli, being born here, is part of the secret sauce that makes America better than other countries. No offense to any foreign nationals in the room. Just, I'm a little homer on this. But in terms of whether or not this is an issue that's going to be something that needs to be discussed, I can tell you when I was in the Rubio office in 2013, this was something that just among my old boss, Senator McCain, Senator Graham, and Senator Flake, we came to a decision like, look, this is an issue that's going to have to be discussed in some way, shape, or form, particularly if you're going to get what we are putting together in the Senate out of the House. So look, we're not adding this into our bill. The House wants to touch this when they do it, and lo and behold, the history shows the House didn't do anything for various and sundry reasons.
There's the
But
question of essential fairness. Do you think it's fair?
I don't think to try to undo this with an executive order, I don't think is a wise move. But I'm not in the administration. I'm not going to defend something that I would not be able to say, like, yeah, I can say this with a straight face is legal. I think this is something, if you want to change this, and I don't think it's wise to change it. I think it's wise to think about how do you stop people coming here illegally in the first place. That way they don't have children who are U.S. citizens and the parents are here and they have no status here. I don't like that at all. But to me, if this is something you want to change, it's got to be done by a constitutional amendment, in my opinion.
What do you think, Emily? And adding to that, the concept of birth tourism, that there are people coming here just to give birth so that their kids would be American citizens.
I think John's point is super clear. It's enshrined in the Constitution, end of story. And if we want to have a national debate on it and somebody wants to put forward a constitutional amendment, I would similarly argue against it. I think our nation is stronger because of the diversity of individuals here, the diversity of nationalities, backgrounds, ethnicities, culture, and would argue that birthright citizenship is a big part of that.
Okay.
One point that I can add, I know you want to get to other questions, but
No, it's okay.
In terms of why I think this is important is because historically, what we have tried to tell people from other nations is you can become like one of us. You don't have to look like everybody else. You don't have to be from the same country that everybody else is from, but you can actually become American. It's not something like you were born with it. It's not part of your DNA. It's because you subscribe to the same ideals that everybody else does. Things that are in the Declaration of Independence, things that are in the Constitution. These are the things that you look at and say, this is the type of government I want to be subject to. That, to me, is, you can go to Switzerland, you become a Swiss citizen, but I'm never going to be Swiss. I can buy a really nice Google clock and make really good chocolate. I'm not going to be Swiss. But that chocolatier that works for Lindt, they can come here and they can become American. That's part of our, not like our literal DNA, but that's part of what this country, like, we take people from various other places and they become just like us. And that to me is, if you start tinkering with birthright citizenship, you start tinkering with that part of the secret sauce. It's like taking garlic out of marinara. It doesn't work right. So I'll leave it at that.
Now we'll go to questions, and raise your hand. Please wait for a mic because we're streaming so that everybody can hear your question.
Hi. So both of you mentioned how we haven't had a significant step towards real border reform since the 90s. And John, I'm really glad you mentioned the Langford border bill because I walked into here thinking about that. And what I took away from that was that it was kind of used for optics by both parties. The Democrats kind of picked it up and said, oh, well, this can be our chance to put together real bipartisan border policy if Vice President Harris had won. But then Donald Trump then convinced the GOP to then not vote for the bill, leaving Langford kind of dejected. So I suspect that immigration has become simply a talking point for so long that it's prevented us from really doing anything about it. So my question is, what did you both think of the bill? What did you take from it? Do you expect that there could be a tipping point where immigration couldn't just be used as a talking point anymore? And is it reasonable to assume that we're going to see another bill like this eventually, especially when Congress has been, like both of you said, kind of subverted by executive action on the issue of immigration?
Geez, you got 3 questions. Okay. So let's start with the first one. What did I think of the Langford Cinema Bill. To me, this was the type of thing that would have been a really good start to touch on a real debate in both the House and the Senate. And I think what you had, I would have liked to have seen certain things in there in terms of some of the triggers being lower than what they were. I can understand
To
why
close the border.
Republicans abandoned James Langford in great haste, because it's really tough to say, oh wow, there's 5,000 people crossing the border every day. This is what it's going to take to close this down. Particularly when that did not happen. And then Biden puts out a rule where he then says, oh, we're going to take this number and lower it considerably. It's like, if it was fine for your rulemaking, please tell me why you made James Langford walk the plank on this when he couldn't get other Republicans on board. And I tend to think if you're going to do something in immigration, I think this was something I will give the Langford office, and there were many other Republicans who I will not name, who were working with him initially. And then when they saw, like, this is going to be bad, they tucked tail and ran. This is something where I will give them some grace in the sense that they thought, well, we did this with the 2018-2019 exercise. We did this in 2013, where we did everything slow, methodical. Everybody had a chance to say their piece. There was a very good amendment process in 2013. I'm just using the 2013 bill as an example. An awful lot of amendments that were being considered in committee. And there was a lot of comedy between the Democrats and the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee. They took from that and said, well, that failed. Let's try to rush this through and see what we can get done. That, to me, I remember saying this to Langford's old chief of staff, Langford's old immigration policy lead. Like, if you do this, you are literally just, you're taking that freight train, and it's going to take a dirt road, and I think you know what's going to happen when this thing goes off the tracks. And, like, the bill was dead. It literally took less than 48 hours for the bill to get killed. And I think, look, lesson learned. Like, you're going to have to do this the slow, methodical, difficult way. And I think it's really fitting that we're all here today talking about, like, how do you build common ground? Because that's how you do it. If you don't talk to other people and you just say, all right, this is what we're going to do, let's just see what happens and roll the dice, well, that's all what happened. I can't remember your other two questions.
She said,
except
would
for
there
one
be a
that had to
tipping
do with, like,
point?
can we actually get to a bill that's like that? I don't think you're going to find a bill that's going to look like that. I think that was, I don't want to be mean and call it a dead letter, but it's the type of thing where, like, that was a bill that was made for that moment in time, and that moment in time came and went. I do think that you could get a measured bipartisan bill together that does touch on asylum, does touch on border stuff, and also make some tweaks to the legal immigration system that would make the awarding of visas, the provision of status, make that a little bit easier in some respects. I don't think you're going to get a very big bill in the near future, but something that's similar in size. The details would be a lot different, but something similar in size, it could happen. But I would look at that as more of over the next 3 years as opposed to the next year and change. I don't see that happening sometime this Congress. Maybe something gets introduced, and you could have, here I go down the speaking DC immigrationese exercise. You could have something that's a lame duck exercise, which is that one session of Congress following the 2026 election. Maybe. That, to me, is the only real window you're looking at in terms of passing a bill.
First, I'll say I think your analysis is spot on. I call it a third rail or a political football. There's a lot of disincentive for leaders to touch this issue right now, especially when it comes to finding common ground and a bipartisan compromise. Around that table, the Langford, Sinema, Murphy table, there was a lot of common ground and a lot of good faith negotiation and an attempt to try to find something that was right for the moment. And I agree with Jon, it was a bill for the moment, and that moment has come and gone. And it's a tragedy, really, that Congress and leaders otherwise have developed such a fear of this issue, because it's an issue that's solvable. We know how to update our system. We know what the right elements are to include in an updated system. We know how to reform asylum. We know that we need pathways that are fit for purpose for the economy that we have today. We know that we need it to be flexible, to ebb and flow as our economy changes and as demands around the world change as well. We know it, and we could do it if we had a serious exercise of sitting around the table with the right stakeholders. It's just so politically toxic, so easy to run on a campaign of fear, of hatred, that it pushes people to opposite poles and creates total disincentives for people to come to the center and to work across the aisle.
Next question.
Hi, I just want to say thank you guys for being here. It's really nice to hear your different perspectives and learn more about this topic. My question for you guys is, if a city declares itself a sanctuary city and refuses to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, should the federal government withhold funding from that city, or is that an overreach of power?
Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to start. I think that there are circumstances in which a city, state and local governments, state and local law enforcement should absolutely be cooperating with federal immigration enforcement officials. And that comes to areas that we've mentioned it several times during the discussion today: national security and public safety. When an individual who has been encountered by local law enfortement poses public safety and national security risks and has a link, a nexus into the immigration system, federal enforcement should be notified, and there should be cooperation to resolve that case together. What I think is concerning is when the federal government comes in and co-opts local law enforcement to use them for federal enforcement purposes, irrespective of the needs of that community. When they are co-opting local law enforcement for federal immigration purposes, they're taking them away from the duties that they would otherwise be doing to serve their community, and I think that that's an overreach. I also, to address your question about federal grants and federal funding, what I've seen this administration do is tie terms and conditions on federal grants for things totally unrelated to immigration enforcement to a pledge that a state and locality will cooperate on federal immigration enforcement. I'm talking infrastructure spending. So do I think that a locality should have their infrastructure funding rescinded or not granted because they refuse to let their local law enforcement be co-opted by federal enforcement? No, I don't think so. I think those are two unrelated. But is there a scenario where there should be cooperation? Absolutely. And I found myself, from my perch in the Biden administration, encouraging states and cities often to bring down some of their guardrails and to cooperate more fully with our federal enforcement officials so that we could address public safety and national security concerns.
You want to add anything, Jonathan?
That was pretty good. The one thing that I would add, though, is at this moment in time, a city wants to basically make a political statement saying we're not going to cooperate with you. I think that's just, it's foolhardy. And it's a symptom that they're just as big a part of the problem as anybody else that they disagree with on the issue. Because in this case, let's just say for the sake of argument, you're in a community that has an awful lot of immigrants in it. And I can say this as someone who lived in Miami, there's a massive amount of immigrants in South Florida. And I think there's something to be said about, even if you're from the opposing party, trying to, not necessarily, throw an olive branch, like, look, we have our unique concerns. I want to take the temperature down. We have these issues. And for folks that are national security or public safety concerns, let's talk about that. For many other people that are living in our communities that are long-term residents, can we have a conversation about that too? That to me is the wise move. And I don't know if Utica's thinking about doing this, or the town of Clinton's thinking about doing this, or just I don't know if you're just picking out if a city wants to do this. I didn't catch that part of your question, but that to me is the smart move to make because you're trying to meet someone halfway. And there are still significant concerns about some foreign nationals who, not to paraphrase Rick Perry, but they're just bad hombres. And we gotta do something about those people because you don't want them in your community. They're not bringing anything positive to your town or city. Those are the individuals that should be in detention, immigration or otherwise.
Other questions?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, both of you, for making the time to come and speak with us. My question is about foreign nationals who actually do cause crime or harm within the United States. So doesn't the US government have an obligation and moral duty to its own citizens to protect its people from both foreign and domestic harm? And by letting basically an open border policy, wouldn't that be violating the obligations to its own citizens? How do you guys think of this?
Emily.
I just want to say preach.
Emily,
I'll
go
leave
ahead.
it at that.
I agree that the federal government has a responsibility in the carrying out of its immigration policies to protect citizens. Absolutely. I would quibble with the notion of an open border policy. As I said, when individuals arrived at our southern border during the Biden administration, they were apprehended by CBP, taken to facilities and processed there. So it wasn't a so-called open border policy. And when an individual is found to be of either a national security concern or public safety risk, we have databases across the federal government that can alert our immigration systems. And in an ideal scenario where there would be cooperation to be able to identify those individuals. And according to our laws, which clearly state in our the Immigration and Nationality Act, there are certain offenses that would render somebody ineligible for asylum if they've committed those offenses. And I think that in an ideal world that we would be carrying that out to the fullest extent.
Next question.
You have been talking about asylum status and the valid reasons how to get it. So what is those reasons?
The valid ways to acquire asylum.
Like valid reasons.
For asylum,
Asylum status, yep.
John, you want to take that?
I still didn't get the question. What?
what are the valid reasons for getting asylum?
Oh, look, I mean, there are people who are actually victims of persecution in their home country. And to me, like, having asylum as a option for individuals who have legitimate cases, to me, needs to be available. We've signed various treaties going back to World War II about this. I think, Emily, you'd agree that some of these treaties or some of our obligations are meant for a different time and place in history than we have today. But the idea that we should just get rid of asylum, that's not something that I agree with, because we should be a refuge for those who are being persecuted. Now, individuals who I would say are masquerading as asylees when they're really economic migrants, I don't like that. That's something that we shouldn't be having. But for individuals that are actually being persecuted for their political opinions, social opinions, all the key criteria that you have in the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, those things need to be there. Like, we need that. You don't want to throw that baby out with the bathwater.
One more question.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. Second of all, I think one thing that I've found striking about the conversation so far is that I don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the words race and racism have been used yet in the conversation. And I think that's like an equally big part of this conversation, especially like in light of the SCOTUS ruling about like phenotype and being able to act based on that as an ICE agent. And so my question is, I guess, about the connection that everyone's like working under the assumption of between economics and immigration. So I'm going to read it. So both nationally and historically, there have been countless instances of politicians and the top 1% using migrants and refugees as scapegoats for the economic problems that citizens face. How would you convince someone in this political moment that our problem is an immigration problem rather than a problem with concentration of wealth by a few 1% individuals?
Emily, you're the Democrat. You don't like the 1%. Come on.
Let me give it a shot. I think the question was asked earlier about whether immigrants are an engine for the economy or a drain. It wasn't phrased in those exact terms, but I am firmly in the engine camp. And I am not just talking about blue-collared immigrants, but I am talking about immigrants coming into our country as children, as white-collar, family reunification, refugee admissions. I think that newcomers bring strength and diversity that translates to strength for our economy. Jon mentioned earlier that in an ideal scenario, we would have a multitude of lawful pathways for individuals to be able to come in an orderly way, and I'm firmly in that camp as well. I think the problem, if there's a problem, and there is, our immigration system is broken. The problem is that it is no longer fit for purpose for what we need today, for the demands that we're seeing around the world, for the needs that our communities have, for the needs that our economy has, and we have not been agile because of our outdated statutes to adjust for that. I think we're seeing that across university campuses. With foreign students and a fear to study in the United States. I think we are seeing that as well in companies that are trying to attract top talent and are caught in a bureaucratic morass as they're trying to have their applications adjudicated in a timely way. We just desperately need an updated system so that we can seize the opportunities, we can harness the potential of immigration in this country.
Before we move on to another question, I want to touch on one of the assumptions you had, in the sense that this is somehow the 1% of the wealthiest in the United States. They're the ones that are making this an issue when there's other families in the country that's like, hey, let's just talk about immigration. It's a distraction. Look, the people that probably disagree with me the most when it comes to like my views of immigration, these people are not 1%ers. These are, good law-abiding citizens, and they view the world just a little bit differently. This is not some sort of like, there's the cabal of the rich. It's like, we have stagnant wage growth, blame it on the immigrants. That's not going on. But in terms of the racial component in all of this, that's, unfortunately, if you want to stop debate, bring it up, because that's what will happen. I have been a part of many meetings, many efforts that have failed, and it's because these racist accusations always get thrown around. And you know what, when someone calls you racist, typically, they're just like, I'm not going to engage. And they're done with it. And I don't think that helps get anything done. There are many people who have all sorts of views about saying, I don't want any more immigrants coming in the country. I don't jump to what's their real motivation. I think there are many people, I don't agree with their views, but I don't think it's because they have some sort of racial bias. I think it's a matter of they seem to think that there are other Americans in this country who somehow need my help or the help of people like me because they're suffering because there's an immigrant here and they're employed. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's a load of bunk. To me, like, you know, if you just look at America's history, it's gotten stronger as more people have come here. And to me, it's like, take the fact that you're dealing with foreign nationals out of the mix. Because I'm from upstate New York. I remember when this state had a lot more electoral college votes. A lot of upstate cities had much bigger populations, much bigger tax bases. You know what you don't want to be? You don't want to be the place that's shrinking. You want to be the place that's growing. I don't think immigration is going to be the thing that's going to, this should be the sole driver of growth. But it's definitely part of the sauce. It's part of the mix, part of the recipe. It definitely helps. And in the sense that, like I know I'm a white guy until I go through TSA. Because I get pulled aside for random screening all the time. So much so that I'm just like, yep, okay, go ahead. I know what you need to do, go ahead. And now the TSA backscatter machines, they have screens now. And they tell you, like, this is where I'm gonna touch you. So like, if I had a nickel for every pat down, I have a new pair of shoes at least. But like, you know, is that because the algorithm, the system is somehow, it's got some racial bias, or just because I have, you know, a swarthy complexion and dark hair? I don't know, but I don't think that's the case.
All right,
And I'm not gonna live my life like that.
let's wrap up. Final question to both of you. I'll start with you, Emily. What is your message to President Trump on this topic of immigration and deportation?
My message is that we need a system that meets American needs. We need a system that promotes order, but part of that system is bringing in newcomers to this country, immigrants, through lawful pathways that adheres to our values, and that we don't need a system that promotes fear, that sows fear and terrorizes communities. And most importantly, we need a system that is updated in statute. And so I would encourage him to be building connections and ties with Congress in a bipartisan fashion to update our laws that are so severely outdated.
Final word, Jonathan, your message to President Trump.
I would urge him to do what we are trying to do here tonight, and that's get out and talk to people who don't agree with you on a bunch of things. On this particular issue, I think it's evident that they're talking with the same group of people in the White House. And I understand that. They're your most trusted advisors. You listen to them for a reason. But get out, talk to some other people. Because to me, you had the likes of Richard Nixon going to China after he was, you know, virulent anti-communist. This to me is the type of thing where you could build a legacy on. Say, listen, we've had immigration problems that have existed in this country for decades. Here and now, I'm going to work with folks in Congress to stop them. All
right, that's the last word. That concludes our evening. Thank you to the panelists for joining us. Thank you for joining us today.